All right, well, good afternoon. I'm Wade Gorley, Chief of Police with the Police Department, and appreciate you guys coming out today. We're just here to answer questions, anything you might have from the preliminary report from 21CP. I'll just start by saying this is a preliminary report. We've been looking it over and kind of digesting everything that's in there, figuring out how it correlates to some things that we're already doing, some things that maybe are a work in process that we're working on as well, and just looking forward to working with the consultants, the task force and the community policing group, and kind of figuring out where we go from here, sort of navigating the waters from here, so to speak. So thank you again for coming out. And of course, we'll answer any questions as they come up, but I'm gonna let the Assistant City Manager introduce himself.
Good afternoon. I'm Kenton Sudel, Assistant City Manager, the one that's over public safety. So as Chief said, and I'll just kind of echo, we're here to talk about the initial recommendations and just to add a little bit more there to the process. These recommendations are initial. They're still, while it's a very important step, a very long process to get here, there's still a lot of work to be done. And we will still be vetting these initial recommendations now with the Mayor's Law Enforcement Policy Task Force and the City Manager's Community Policing Working Group, and working towards looking at feasibility, looking at opportunities and obstacles, and looking at just prioritization and things like that to get to a final report ultimately. So just kind of wanted to start with that some of these recommendations may change, they may morph. There's a lot of work to be done, but we're excited that we've taken this very important step. So with that, we'll just kind of step back and take questions. And if anyone has any questions, one of us will address those.
I'll start off. One for Chief Gorley. I know that one of the recommendations involves video of use of force, and I know that you, I believe, passed a policy in June regarding releasing video quicker after it happens. How? I know that was something that you said back in June, or that you kind of directed back in June. Is the department releasing video as quickly as it should be now, and how much quicker does it need to get if it's not?
To clarify on that, the releasing of the videos is on critical incidents such as officer-involved shootings. We have become much quicker at that. We're releasing those now normally we release those within 24 hours, but it's usually shorter than that, of that officer being interviewed after that officer-involved shooting, that we'll go ahead and release that. So we have gotten a lot quicker with that. Before, that was taking weeks, months, sometimes longer. As far as just the release of video itself, that's always something, we have a unit that has to review all that before it goes out through open records. We are upgrading to a new system that I think will help us even release the lower level incidents quicker as well. But on the officer-involved shootings, the critical incidents such as that, anything that involves a death, we'll be releasing those within 24 hours of the officer being interviewed.
As for this recommendation, I believe it was, I'm not sure the exact number.
Yeah, I think the recommendation you're referring to is in regards to how the officers are handled after an officer-involved shooting. And in that particular recommendation, it recommended, as of right now, we wait 48 hours before we interview the officer. There's some studies that are out there, right, wrong, or indifferent, that kind of led us to that point. That's something that's been there for a while, to where the officer's memory and some other things as far as stress and other things that factor into that 48 hours has always kind of been a recommendation in doing that. But then the more critical part in that is right now, through negotiations with our fraternal order of police based on an arbitration that we had, all of our body worn camera procedures have to be negotiated with the union. And because of that, that's where that 48 hours comes in. And then also the fact that they can view the video before they're interviewed. And so I don't believe that's a best practice, viewing the video first. And 21CP agrees with that. That'll be something we'll have to negotiate with the union and try to work through. But that's something, really we're evolving. Body cameras are fairly new to law enforcement. And so when those procedures were established, those were the best practices. And now over time, those practices have changed. So I think it's good that we're looking at that.
So you support their recommendation that they shouldn't be able to view the videos before making their statement?
I do support that based on the current evidence that's out there, and what is considered a best practice. around the country. I go to conferences with major city chiefs, and we discuss this quite frequently with other agencies that are our size around the country. And that is something more and more that agencies are evolving to, is they're getting the interview first, getting that raw emotion, getting the officer's interpretation of what happened, and then allowing them to view the body camera afterwards. And again, how that comes about or how we actually end up doing that, I won't know until we can negotiate and work through that and look at exactly what they mean in the recommendation, because this is an initial recommendation. So once, we kind of get a further look at that, there may be some things we tweak or change or move forward. But I do support on its face that the officer should be interviewed prior to viewing the body-worn camera.
And the time frame, do you have an opinion on that? And it seems like this dramatically shortens up the time frame before they're interviewed. They're taking away that 48-hour time frame.
That's something I need to do a little bit more research on. I'm not as familiar with, and I understand the science behind why you wait. I don't understand as much, the science or the reasoning behind why you don't. So that's something that I'll need to delve into a little bit more.
But on the note of changing the order of things when it comes to when officers view the video, when it's released, how long between those things, I can imagine that going into conversations with the union that they could see that as losing protection in some ways. How might you justify those changes to the union?
Well, it's just like any changes that come up. Again, we look at best practice. We look for the situation and, just provide the facts in that. And it's a negotiation back and forth. And our union's always been real receptive to us sitting down and making change. And we've had to make some changes recently to our body camera procedure based on some new technology that we're about to get in the body-worn cameras. And so they've been real receptive to that. And hopefully, we can sit down and work that out.
I also have a question about the Citizens Advisory Board. I know that the recommendations kind of bolster the importance and the abilities of the Citizens Advisory Board. Can you just kind of, at its current place, and just to set a baseline, how much does the Citizens Advisory Board do right now?
They review pretty much all of our complaints, all of our, a large majority of our uses of force, all officer-involved shootings, and they have a very involved role in all of our administrative investigations. They meet every other month right now. We also, since I became chief, we instituted a process where, since they aren't meeting more frequently, that we send them cases to review that they can review themselves prior to coming together for the meeting. So it helps us be a little bit more productive. Those are usually things that don't involve complicated issues or may not have video or other things with them, but something that they can sit down and read and understand the concept and then be able to come in prepared and ask questions. And I think that's part of the issue that they pointed out in their report is I don't think we've done as good a job communicating to the public what the Citizens Advisory Board does. They've been around for a long time, and I think you get kind of complacent that everybody knows what they do and who they are. And I think that's one of the things moving forward that we'll definitely be working on is getting more information out about their involvement in the process. And we want them to be more vocal too.
Absolutely. Because I know in one of the recommendations actually kind of criticizes, it sounds like, the current makeup of the board and kind of says that reestablishing membership as well as the members of the board, because the current members are perceived as those who are interested in preserving the status quo, as I believe the quote in there. Are you open to not like I know that this even said it doesn't want to remake the wheel, but are you supportive of revamping the Citizens Advisory Board in a way that makes it capable of holding the police department accountable? Because that's kind of their critique. It reads like it doesn't do much right now.
I'm always open to anything that's an improvement that can improve our processes. Sometimes too, when you're on the inside looking out, you think things are going really well. And so it's good to have that consultant come in and have a view from the outside looking in. I don't know how all that's going to come together, what their recommendations will be once they're finalized on that. But I do think there needs to be some changes. I think, the biggest thing is being more public, having the process be more open, more access to the community. And I agree with all of those things. And Just not sure how we're going to get there yet based off that preliminary recommendation, but I'm always open to any improvements in any process that we have.
Just one last on this. Specifically, kind of what advice, recommendations does the board give the police department? Now, you said it reviews some cases, but not critical ones. Kind of what are they looking after? Critical cases, officer-involved shootings, and issuing recommendations on any of those?
They review all officer-involved shootings, and that's what I meant on the more critical cases. Yeah, the ones that they review prior to the meeting, the ones that we send out, those will be the less critical type. Maybe a complaint that was unsubstantiated or something like that, something that didn't maybe involve a use of force, or the less controversial or critical type of events. But they review all officer-involved shootings, all in custody deaths, those type of things. They do offer recommendations sometimes they ask for further information. They can issue a letter to me or the city manager and either say they're in support of or they're in disagreement with. I recently started asking them to review our terminations. We move those towards the front, and I want them to review those and decide, did I make the right decision in this termination? Do they support that decision? Because I think that helps us too going forward. If we have an outside group look at that and they're in support of that, it may help us on some of our arbitrations and other things that are sometimes difficult for us to get past on those terminations. So that's just an example of some of the things that they do.
So what is the process for some of these recommendations to go into effect?
Are you talking about the 21CP recommendations?
So I think the process from here, we've got these initial recommendations. Over the next couple of months, we'll be working through those with the task force and with the working group and getting feedback. The way 21CP has described this to us is that, these recommendations are sort of the skeleton, and we're putting a little bit more flesh on the bone over these next couple of weeks and looking at how they might be implemented. At that point, they would go to the city council to be received by the city council. So that's probably looking at sometime in the winter time, late fall. At that point, once the recommendations are complete and they're accepted, at that point, it's really up to the city manager's office, working with the police department and the community to implement these. But primarily, that's going to be the city manager's office and the police department. And really, Chief and his staff would be on the lead on that. And to get specific with anything's hard right now because we don't know exactly what some of those are. If you've read the report, there are some that have some specificity, some that are still a little bit conceptual right now, need a little bit more work. But that's kind of what the process looks like. Obviously, we don't want to rush it, and if it needs a little more time, we'll put more time to it, but that's what we're shooting for right now.
When they go to city council, will all the is it all or nothing, or could some be approved and some not?
It's hard to answer that right now. What we anticipate is the entire report would go to city council. If we've done our job right, and if 21CP's done their job right, we've sort of identified what are the opportunities, what are the challenges. And this is something that there may be some things that we can implement very quickly. There may be some things that take time. There's potentially legislative changes. As Chief mentioned, there could potentially be collective bargaining issues, budgeting issues. There are some things that could just be from the procedure of going out and finding who our partners and providers are that might help us with those recommendations. So it's really hard to say at this point. My sense is we would have the total set of recommendations go, but it would sort of be an iterative process implementing them.
And with the FOP, I know they're working on the 2021-22 contract, collective bargaining agreement. So for those recommendations that would need things to be changed, would we have to wait until next year to talk about that?
Yeah.
It's kind of different depending on the recommendation. For example, the body-worn camera procedure is not actually in the contract, but due to an arbitrator ruling, any changes in the body-worn camera procedure have to be, we have to sit down and bargain about those and meet with them to work out an agreement. So they have to be agreed upon. So even though that may not be in the contract, that's a good thing because those particular ones, we could sit down with the FOP outside of the actual contract negotiations and bargain or work back and forth through the process with the procedure. Some of the others that are on there, they may, if they are specifically in the contract, then yeah, they'll have to go through at that time during negotiations.
Do you know of any that are in the contract specifically?
Well, it's kind of complicated because even though the actual wording of it may not be in the contract, there may be something that could be considered a change in working conditions, such as the interviewing, not waiting any time to interview after that. That particular thing is not specifically in there, but it could be interpreted as that's a change in our working conditions, and then that would have to be bargained on or negotiated on in the time of the contract.
Was there a demand for change within our department?
Are you talking about specifically the result of this?
Yes.
Not necessarily. I mean, our officers are always looking to improve. We have what's called the debriefing culture in our organization, where every time we respond to any significant event, whether it's a significant crime scene, it's a pursuit, or just a call that they went on that was very complicated, they spend the next day debriefing that incident and then providing feedback and how we can change things. So I think our officers are always looking to improve and looking to change things, and it's just part of our culture. It's part of law enforcement in general. Something that's a great idea today, 5 years from now, somebody realizes that wasn't such a great idea, and we end up changing things.
One question on alternative response programs. I know that this kind of brought up, it didn't recommend anything specifically, but it kind of mentioned some alternative programs like the Memphis model with I believe North Care, it works with the department, and proposed community co-response, another program similar to the Cahoots in Oregon. Are you open to the idea of expanding or creating a new alternative response program? I know Cahoots is an example of something completely separate, because I know the recommendation said that the perception of North Care was mixed among the work group here, and so the idea of expanding or changing the existing alternative response program, what do you think about it?
Absolutely. We handle on average about 20,000 calls that we know are mental health related every year. Sometimes other things that we deal with that may not be documented as a mental health call could turn out to be that way too. So it's a significant amount of resources and time that we spend on responding to those types of calls. And it's always good if we can safely figure out a way to have mental health providers or other groups respond. Part of the issue in Oklahoma, we've been behind this idea for a long time. This is something that's been going on around the country. But part of the issue in Oklahoma is the way our state statutes are written. We're starting to see some change in that. We're starting to see a little bit better funding for mental health. People are realizing that what we have here in Oklahoma can be better. And so it's what it's going to take. It's not just going to be us. A lot of people think we can go out, get a van, put a couple of people in it, and go out and start taking care of business today. And you just can't. We don't have all the resources and all the infrastructure on the backside to deal with that. But we as law enforcement are extremely open to that. And I even remember as a young rookie, the very first call I ever took was a mental health call. And I remember thinking, I don't know why we're out here. This is not something that I would think a police officer should be handling. And so we're all in agreement with that. We want to see better ways to do that, but we want to be safe too. We don't want to send someone into a situation that could be dangerous. So that's one of those that's a little bit more complicated, but I'm confident we'll get there. We'll have some type of change there.
I know one of the recommendations was about publishing data on use of force and having kind of a dashboard. Norman has a open data portal with a lot of things other than use of force. Is that something that you all have been considering even before this recommendation? And what do you think that might look like?
Absolutely. One of the first things that I looked at when I became chief is, and I'd been working on this even as a deputy chief, but it's really hard to get something started that's really complicated, quickly when you've never done it before. But a lot of agencies do what's called an annual report, and providing that data kind of updated as you go. And a lot of our systems that we have as far as providing that real-time data aren't very good for that right now. We are looking at updating our records management system. That'll help us with that. But the biggest thing is we have been working on an annual report. Matter of fact, we just sent over a copy of that today to kind of have a final review done. It's in a rough draft form right now. My hope is that very soon that will be released, and it does list all of our uses of force, all of our deadly force, but then also gives a better picture of how many calls we took last year, how many interactions, community resource programs, and other things that we have that, again, to me is a big part of all of this. As you look at all of these recommendations, is a lot of these things we're doing a pretty good job at, but we're not getting the word out to the public. So that's where we're looking right now, is getting that annual report out as quick as we can for 2020. And I think that'll help address at least that issue.
Got a little more big picture question. These are all recommendations on a piece of paper right now. It's a process that's long and arduous, and people may not follow. Should people expect that when these recommendations come out, that when there are suggestions made, will these be followed up on? Will these lead to actual changes? Because I know that a lot of people agree with these concepts, but can this actually lead?
Absolutely, and I believe there's already things in there that we've been looking at and wanting to do anyway. And again, for us, change is not difficult because we're used to it. We have to adapt all the time. Laws change every year. We have to change how we train, how we, different less lethal devices come out. Computer technology changes. So for law enforcement, if we did things the way I did and was trained in as a rookie back in 1989, we'd be way behind the times. So throughout my entire career and all the officers on this department, even officers that joined 3 or 4 years ago, they've seen a lot of significant change. So absolutely, and there's nothing that I look at in there that, I think this is crazy or outlandish or anything like that. I look at some of them and think, okay, how do we get there? How do we get to that point? But I think they're all great ideas, and I think they're things that we've already been looking at. Some of them that we are doing, but we can do better. So yeah, I think, and that's part of this too, is I believe as we go forward, we have to make sure we communicate, whatever item number it is, or, we were able to implement this week, or through discussions with whatever group is involved in that, we were able to come to this solution. And we have to be more transparent about that and making sure we're getting that information out.
Also involves some other parties working with you, right?
Absolutely. It's not all on us. I mean, it's going to be an entire community, entire city government approach. There's some things in there that may require some more changes to the law, with the mental health response and things like that. So it's going to take a lot more than just our department, but we're on board.
Once the final report comes out and say City Council approves it, what happens to the task force and the community policing working group?
So, this is something we have to kind of finish the timeline on and determining, but, at that point, I think there is a handoff where a lot of their work is done. However, I anticipate a lot of those folks that are on those committees are important community partners, people that we talk with, deal with all the time. Within the recommendations, there's certainly many recommendations that have touch points, other committees, things like that, that are kind of an ongoing touch point. And so we'll look at that. Certainly these are folks we talk to a lot anyway. It's also been a great process that's helped us forge a lot of new relationships and strengthen some relationships. So we'll still be having a lot of conversations. As far as the formal groups, it may be winding down at that point, but that's yet to be determined. We're still trying to kind of work that out. So.
I'm sorry if I've already said this, Ken, but it's in terms of just a quick overview, how many more kind of focus groups, or what are we looking at in terms of community outreach for this?
Well, most of the community outreach that's been going on is really in the phase that's just completed. So there's still a little bit of community outreach going on, talking, following up on, if a member said, hey, I want 21CP to talk to this group. There's still discussions going on with the police department, with management, with task force members. The most major piece that's left is we are working with a group to do a community survey around some of these topics. And that's really a scientifically designed survey to try to get, it's the same group that does our annual resident survey, trying to get kind of more general feedback on some of these issues. But really, that major community drive and push and input is really been completed mostly at this point, and that has informed a lot of this. As always in city government, the community input never stops, though. So, folks, there's still active ways to engage with us. People have our email addresses, our phone numbers, things like that. So, the community engagement never ends. But formally, it was really completed, the majority of it in that phase that just completed with the issuance of these recommendations. So.
That's it.
Any more questions?
All
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.